to 3 to 10 years in prison for a 2004 sexual assault. I'm joined now by Rick Leventhal, who is outside the courtroom with the very latest. 3 to 10 years, not as much as he could have served, but nonetheless, Bill Cosby is going to prison, Rick.
He is indeed, Julie. No less than 3 years, no more than 10 years. The judge ruling that Bill Cosby must cover the cost of the prosecution, $25,000, apparently over the first 12 months, not to contact the family of the alleged victim, Andrea Constand, or Andrea Constand, and is subject to sex offender program. So Bill Cosby, 81, and according to his defense team, legally blind, will be going to state prison. And it is our understanding that he will be first taken to the Montgomery County Jail in Lower Providence Township to await transport to the State Correctional Institute Phoenix, which is about 12 miles north of Philadelphia, where Bill Cosby had an estate, where Bill Cosby took Andrea Constand, and where he gave her drugs and then sexually assaulted her, the basis of the aggravated indecent assault charges. So now Bill Cosby has been sentenced 3 to 10 years in state prison. That means that he will most likely, we assume pretty shortly, be taken out a back door of this courthouse in handcuffs, put in a police transport, and taken to that county jail to be transferred to a state prison facility where he will be evaluated and then presumably spend at least the next 3 years of his life, Julie.
And so let's talk appeals process. As you know, of course, his lawyers are going to appeal this. By sentencing him to 3 to 10 years, does that hurt his appeals process? Does it make it harder for his defense to try to appeal, considering a minimum of 3 years is not nearly as much as he could have served?
Well, first of all, the judge merged the 3 charges that he was convicted of into one. So he could have faced 10 years on each count. They merged them, so the max he could face was 10. So basically the judge said 3 to 10, touching on that maximum sentence that he could have received based on the merging of the charges. One of the big questions was, would the judge allow him free on bail while he considered any appeals that might be filed? And the DA, Kevin Steele, said because you deemed him a sexually violent predator, he doesn't qualify for house arrest. So that may have played into the judge's decision. We're just not sure about that. But I'll tell you this, Bill Cosby could have spoken in court today in his own defense. He could have said something to the judge about remorse for what he had done. He didn't do that, and there was talk beforehand that he probably wouldn't, because if he says he has remorse, that wouldn't support an appeal if he claims innocence. We can tell you that when Bill Cosby in court was informed of the responsibilities he would have as a sex offender, he was told that the victims in this case would be notified. Bill Cosby asked if he had to notify them and was told no, and Cosby, according to our producer in the courtroom, replied, good. So that's being handled by the state. Bill Cosby is not notifying his offenders. He's been told you can't contact, his victims, and there's one confirmed victim here, but more than 60 women claim that Bill Cosby assaulted them, and then several of them were in the courtroom, including former supermodel Janice Dickinson. She was here to hear that sentence being read inside the courtroom here in Norristown in Montgomery County Courthouse. So, again, Bill Cosby sentenced to 3 to 10 years in prison. We expect to hear from the DA at a news conference, and probably some of these women who've been spending much of this time in the courtroom who claim Bill Cosby did the same thing to them. Perhaps even the victim, Andrea Constand, will speak. We're not sure about that, but we'll be waiting to find out, Julie.
All right, Rick Leventhal, stand by. I want to bring in Judge Andrew Napolitano. He joins me here in the studio. He just mentioned the DA, Steele. He had asked the judge to sentence Cosby to 5 to 10 years. The Cosby defense had asked for house arrest. They also had hoped for less time because he is over 80 years old and he is legally blind. The judge did not have sympathy there. However, he did get a lot less time than he could have been sentenced.
Well, he could have been sentenced to 30 years.
Sure.
Which would be odd for a person 82 years old.
It's been done before.
Yes, it has been done before. And this judge, who really showed no sympathy whatsoever during the trial and may have exposed the trial to, and did expose the trial to, appealable issues, about which more later if you want to go there, has actually given a rather lenient sentence. So lenient that I'm almost wouldn't be surprised if Cosby's people only file an appeal of the guilty verdict rather than of the sentence. But if they do file an appeal of the sentence, expect the state to cross appeal, which could raise the sentence up. Right now, between 3 and 10 means he must serve 80% of 3, so 2 3/4 years in jail. Thereafter, it's up to prison officials, based upon his health, his demeanor, his work in the prison, his attitude in the prison, whether and if he can leave before the 10.
You know, a lot of people thought that this guy got off easy. I mean, if he serves or if he is sentenced to a minimum of 3, you know he's not going to serve 3 years in prison. He'll get off on good behavior. I'm sure Bill Cosby is not going to be a menace behind bars.
Well, the good behavior reduction wouldn't kick in until he serves 2 years and 9 months. So he's going, the minimum he could serve is
2
very,
years,
very
9
close
months.
to 3. Correct.
Now, let's just talk about the fact that the 3 counts of aggravated indecent assault, that these 3 charges were combined into 1 charge. So you're talking 10 years per charge. Many would argue, why combine them into 3? Now, you have one woman accuser who says this literally destroyed her life. She's
Yes.
the only one who is being taken into account, her story into this particular case. However, the judge allowed the jurors to consider the 60 other women who, in fact, accused Bill Cosby of the same. So it's very confusing when you have one accuser, one court case, but there are 60 other accusers that have nothing to do with this particular case that the jurors had to consider when coming up with a verdict.
That is, listen, as reprehensible as Bill Cosby's behavior has been,
right,
and as he was convicted in this case, his rights were severely violated by permitting the events that were not charged in the indictment to come before the jury. In most states, not Pennsylvania, those events, called prior bad acts, to show a pattern of behavior, can only come into play at the time of sentencing. They are not revealed to the jury. The jury only hears the allegations of the charge in the indictment, which in this case was just Andrea Constant, not the other 59 women.
All right. Bill Cosby sentenced to 3 to 10 years in prison. We should be seeing him being escorted out of this courthouse in handcuffs just moments from now. Please stay tuned to Fox News Channel and this Fox station for continuing coverage of this story. I'm Julie Banderas in New York. And we continue with our coverage here on Fox News Channel, and Judge Andrew Napolitano is here with me. We're talking about this particular sentence.
Right.
His lawyers would almost be doing their client a disservice if they were to actually fight this, because they could potentially end up getting more time.
I would strongly urge them to appeal the conviction, but not to appeal
the sentence.
No. The sentence is almost too light, given everything that the jury heard. But of course, I don't know everything this judge knows, and I haven't even seen the reasons that he's given. He spent an hour putting his reasons on the record, and we'll know those reasons in a couple of minutes when our producer comes out to debrief or to be debriefed by Rick Leventhal. But yes, it's a light sentence. I'd be surprised if they appeal it, because if they do, then the state's going to cross appeal. But they must appeal the conviction, because the violations of his civil liberties on the face of it, by permitting uncharged acts to be revealed to the jury, begs for an appellate review.
I want to go back to the courthouse to Rick Leventhal. And Rick, in June of 2017, Ms. Constant described how Cosby, who she viewed as a mentor, and I'm quoting, gave her pills that left her frozen. She also said, and she provided a statement to reporters by the prosecution team, quote, "To truly understand the impact that the sexual assault has had on my life, you have to understand the person that I was before it happened." She says that she was robbed of her spirit by all of this. Bill Cosby has presumed innocent and has maintained his innocence since the day he was accused by 60-plus women of this. His wife has also stood by his side. Was she in the courtroom today?
We didn't see Camille today, Julie, and I do have a copy of that 5-page letter that Andrea Constant filed with the court, her victim impact statement, in which she said, "During the assault, I was paralyzed and completely helpless, powerless to protect myself. After the assault," she says, "the shame was overwhelming. I felt completely alone, unable to trust anyone, including myself." She says her life was in essence ruined by what this man did to her. And I just wanted to weigh in on the sentence, because more than 100 other people were convicted of the same aggravated indecent assault charge that Bill Cosby was convicted of here in the state of Pennsylvania. And 79% of them were sentenced to prison time. The average sentence, somewhere between 22 months and 3 years. Those were the guidelines that this Judge Stephen O'Neill was working under. And I'd be curious what Judge Napolitano had to say about that. If the guidelines were 22 months to 3 years and he got 3 to 10 years, it seems to be pretty much in line with what other defendants who, convicted of the same crime were given in similar circumstances.
Judge, you want to address Rick?
Yeah, Rick is absolutely correct, but the break that Judge O'Neill gave him was the combining of the three charges as if they had been one. So it's the average that Rick's talking about. The guideline is 22 months per charge. He really was convicted of 3, but sentenced as if he was only convicted of 1.
Rick?
Yeah. The only other thing about that was, yes, there were 3 charges, but it was 1 act. And Julie, you mentioned these dozens of other women who claimed similar acts where they were drugged and assaulted by him, but there was just 1 instance here being considered in this courtroom, and it's not uncommon for judges, and I'm sure Judge Napolitano can weigh in on that as well, if it's not uncommon with a single instance, a single incident, when there are multiple charges that basically mirror each other, to combine them into one and then sentence them based on that.
What do we expect to see happen right now? We're looking on the left of our screen, the courtroom, as reporters are starting to file out. We have a producer that's in that courtroom as well. We're also waiting to see Bill Cosby come out in handcuffs, which will be quite alarming to see, who was once considered America's dad, come out ashamed for this conviction and sentence.
It may well be, Julie, it may well be that he doesn't come out that door he's been going in and out of every day as a civilian, as someone who's waiting to find out his fate. He may be going through a back door as a criminally convicted defendant heading to prison. So they may take him in the back, and then they have to process him and then bring him down a back stairway and put him in a police van. We may not see him. We have cameras all around this building, but it's possible that he's going to get in a van in a Sally Port or some hidden location there behind the courthouse and be driven out of here. We'll see the van or the police transport, but we may not see Bill Cosby again for quite some time.
I would assume his defense lawyers are trying to make a deal somehow with the judge to try to escort him privately out of the building.
Well, he's not going to get, at this point, he is absolutely a convicted felon. The conviction is final at the moment of sentencing. He's not going to get any breaks from anybody. And Rick is right. These I don't know this courthouse, but almost all of them are built so that once the defendant is sentenced to jail, that person never sees the light of day again. So they're going to get him in a van, I think, without us seeing it at all.
Rick, you were going to say something?
I do have, well, just that the court is now in recess. Our producer is telling us it's not over yet. The defense is asking for bail pending appeal. Prosecutors say that's not appropriate. Apparently the judge is now considering that request, so they're in recess. And when they come back and he makes a ruling on that, then I guess we'll find out Bill Cosby's fate.
Well, considering
his final fate.
He was considered a sexually violent predator, I don't believe that this judge is going to be granting bail.
No, but the judge is required to consider patiently all reasonable applications made by defense counsel. No way is he going to give him bail after the findings he just made, but he must consider it and deny it because that could be appealed to an appellate court this afternoon or tonight.
Okay, we have somebody else joining in on our conversation as well, and both of you stay with us. James Trusty is a former DOJ, Department of Justice prosecutor. He joins me now to talk more about this. We're talking about the sentencing here between 3 and 10 years, but what I think is interesting is the fact that this judge decided to fold all 3 counts of the aggravated indecent assault charges into one combined charge. Now, Rick Leventhal just mentioned that there was only 1 act, and we're talking about Andrea Constant. However, interestingly enough, and something you don't often see, is for jurors to be allowed to be influenced by outside accusers who have nothing to do with this case. And I'm talking about the 60 other accusers who joined Andrea Constant in maintaining that they were sexually abused and drugged by Bill Cosby. Are you surprised, first of all, A, that the judge folded these 3 charges and combined them into one, and B, that he allowed the jurors to be influenced by outside accusers?
No. And so the first part is called merger. It's not a matter of mercy by the judge. He's not saying I want to restrict the sentencing to a potential of 10 years. It's a legal determination that the acts that support each of the counts of conviction are the same. And so ultimately, although it was properly charged as 3 counts, you can't stack up the sentencings because it's all one single criminal act. So that wasn't a function of the judge saying I want to reduce the punishment. So that part's no surprise. That will not lead to any sort of successful appeal by either party. The second part is the concept of other crimes evidence. And this was litigated. It's an issue for appeal, but I have to tell you, I think it's extremely uphill for the defense because the standard is whether the trial judge abused his discretion. And the judge didn't let all 60 come in. He let 5. It was either 3 or 5, but I think it was 5 independent witnesses come in and testify about similar incidents. There are very narrowly crafted exceptions why other crimes might be helpful for the current jury, and the judge made very precise findings and, again, used discretion. Didn't go with 10, didn't go with 15, didn't go with 60. Said pick your best 5 and you can use those. I think it's certainly harmful stuff for a defendant to hear the other victims testifying in the trial of one victim, but it's a very well-trodden road. This is an area that has been seen many times in criminal cases, and I don't think it's going to lend itself to any great appeal because the judge did use discretion and didn't just automatically give the government what they wanted.
Do you think Bill Cosby got off easy, or do you think his sentence was just?
Well, you know, it's this kind of sentencing scheme where you have a range of years is so anticlimactic because we don't have a real number. I don't like that whole system where it's either 3 or 10. And really what the judge does in that circumstance is abdicate to the prison system. They'll figure it out later. And so victims go home today, media people go home, and nobody really knows if he's serving 2 years and 9 months or 10 years. And that's a statutory creature. That's the way the Pennsylvania legislature set it up. But at the end of the day, the judge really hasn't told us what Bill Cosby is actually going to serve, so we're kind of left guessing and waiting over time.
I've got Judge Andrew Napolitano here. You have sentenced over 1,000 criminals to prison.
Yes.
Can you explain to me 3 to 10? Why don't we just get a flat year?
It's difficult for me to do that because I did so in a system like the federal system where our colleague is accustomed to working, where you sentence to a finite and specific number. This Pennsylvania system, which by the way is also shared here in New York, is considered old-fashioned and was undone in many states, but not in New York and not in Pennsylvania. And it basically, as our colleague has just said, transfers the decision-making power from the judge to the prison authorities. In my experience, in the federal system, in the New Jersey state system, it is inconceivable that a judge would give that much discretion to prison authorities.
How do you give prison authorities that much power after so much money and time has been devoted to a trial?
They do have guidelines. It's not a blanket and unchecked power. There actually is a mathematical formula that they can check, which can reduce his time.
It just seems a great span between 3 and 10. We're talking a lot of years here. I want to go back to Rick Leventhal, who's got more on this outside the courtroom. Hey, Rick.
Well, I just wanted to remind our viewers, Julie, that this is a man who's lived a life of celebrity for more than 50 years. His first TV show, I Spy, started in the 60s. He's been living a pretty good life all that time. His health has been failing. He's now, according to his attorneys, legally blind, and now he's going to find himself inside a state prison for at least 3 years, according to this judge. And what my understanding is that because of his legal blindness, they're going to assign an inmate to Bill Cosby to help guide him around because he's going to be in prison legally blind and will need help getting around. When he's come in and out of this courthouse every day, he's had his assistant, Andrew Wyatt, at his arm to help him out of the vehicle, to help him up the sidewalk and into the courthouse and in and out of the courtroom. And some people were speculating that perhaps some of that was an act. It really doesn't matter now because now he's going to prison. So if he needs help, apparently they're going to give it to him. But it's going to be a very different life for this man who was once one of the most famous people really in the world. Now he's going to find himself with a number on his chest.
You know, that is pretty incredible. The fact that he is actually going to be sharing a room, another cell with another inmate, and that inmate would actually be assigned to making sure he can get around the place okay?
Well, that inmate himself will get credit for having helped Bill Cosby, and that will reduce whatever he's in for, will reduce that inmate's time. But the state is going to do their own evaluation of his sight. They're not going to accept the evaluation that Bill Cosby has given or that his own doctors have given. And I suggest to you that the state's standard for legal blindness is probably different than the one that his personal ophthalmologist has used. Because having a personal assistant in jail is almost unheard of, no matter what your condition is.
I don't think most of us get personal assistants in our working lives, let alone as a prisoner. James, I think that might be a bit of a stretch, but we'll have to wait and see. But as far as this sentence goes, you know, I was talking about this stretch between 3 and 10 years, and Judge Napolitano was just talking about how prison officials are ultimately the ones who make the final decision as to whether it's going to be 3 years or whether it's going to be 10. Something seems off there.
Well, the judge is right. I mean, it's the system that we're living with in Pennsylvania and I guess in New York as well. And it's kind of a maddening system because we don't have any certainty. I'm sure, again, the judge is right that there are formula that are in play, that there are analyses, periodic reviews that are done within the prison system, just like a parole board, to try to figure out, what the balance is, whether Mr. Cosby's health becomes failing, whether he is going to serve 10 years or 3 years. It's just a strange setting that it gets left, all of the drama of having a judicial sentencing gets turned into an administrative action that's pretty much behind closed doors. And so, we're left with non-answers, that we don't really know exactly how much he's going to serve. We know it's going to start, and I don't think he's going to get on bail, but we really don't know where it's going to end, at least for another couple of years.
I've got an attorney on the phone, Joseph Camerata, who represents 7 of Bill Cosby's victims. Joseph, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Your reaction to today's sentence?
Well, as the court said, the judge told Mr. Cosby the day has come, the time has come, and justice is going to be served. And justice was served. The court imposed a significant sentence that the judge said gave a voice to the jury's verdict, that it was affecting, the decision was affected by the impact that this serious offense had on Andrea Constant and her family, and that the impact that it had on the community. And so the court recognized and said repeatedly it was a serious offense, that he had heard the words of the victim and her family, Andrea Constant and her family, that this serious sexual assault had had a significant impact on her, continues to have a significant impact on her and her family. And the court imposed a sentence that was consistent with that significant impact. The minimum that he will serve is 3 years. At the end of 3 years, he'll be eligible for parole. If he doesn't get parole, then he will continue to serve another year. He'll be up again in the 4th year for parole, and if he will have repeated attempts to get parole up until the 10th year when his sentence will end. Right. So he's got a 3-year minimum, 10-year max, with the ability to get parole over the years 3 to 7. So that's where things stand.
I want to ask you, there were five accusers among the 60 who were brought in to testify as witnesses. Were one of your clients among them?
No, they weren't. My clients are 7 individuals. A couple of them were 3 of them were the original Jane Does in the case that Andrea Constant brought back in 2004 against Mr. Cosby. And they're my clients in a case that's pending against Mr. Cosby in federal court for defamation.
What did you make?
The women that testified, the judge said he heard what they had to say. He reread their testimony, but it wasn't a factor that he could take into account in rendering his decision as to what the sentence would be, because they were uncharged crimes, and that was not a factor that was appropriate for him to consider. But what he had, the evidence he did have, was powerful enough to send a significant message that this is not something that's going to be tolerated in a civilized society, that there was an impact on the community, as well as Andrea Constant and her family.
Joe, I want to ask you to stand by. I have to go back to our reporter. Rick Leventhal is on the scene, and he has some more information on background as he stands by outside the courthouse. Rick?
We have some notes, Julie, from our producer, Alyssa Kaplan, who's been in the courtroom throughout this sentencing hearing, and there was a break. She was able to email us some notes, so I'm reading from her notes. She said that while waiting for the judge, Cosby just took off his tie and gave it to his friend. Before reading out the sentence, the judge, Stephen O'Neill, told the court the reason for the specific sentence. He said this is a serious sexual assault, that he put seriousness on the weight of the crime as it came to light in testimony. He says he's not permitted to treat Bill Cosby differently because of who he is or who he was. He said he recognized Cosby's age and that he's blind, but that is not the factor that he would put the most weight in. And he did, in fact, sentence Bill Cosby to a minimum of 3 years and no more than 10 years in state prison, total confinement, as he put it. And we are waiting now for the judge to rule on an appeal that the defense made as to whether or not Bill Cosby can remain free while they consider that appeal.
All right, Rick, thank you very much. I want to bring back our attorney that we had on the phone, Joe Camerata.